if one can record both rooms.
Yeah, how do you record both rooms?
Yes, Farid, how do you record both rooms?
I started the recording, but I don't know if it's recording both.
I'm sure it will record both rooms. This has to be, I'm sure, no?
It's recording.
It says it's recording.
It says recording, but I'm in this room. I don't know if it's gonna record the other room.
Okay, so another thing, yeah, if not, somebody can record it from their computer on the other room. We know that we're
model as typical non-hierarchical parts, the resulting building forms create disorienting, unpleasant, and often socially exclusive environments. Perhaps by establishing an appropriate hierarchy of design elements and activating the areas of a housing development that have evolved into the most banal spaces, for example, hallways, pedestrian streets, and outdoor spaces, new solutions.
Oh, it follows Farid.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know Farid has a way that he records the screen if we want to record this. If not, no? Does somebody know how to do that? Joy, you know how to record the
if
screen?
someone in either of the meetings wants to request to record, I can give them permission. That way
okay.
Record both of them.
Excellent. So I'm going to request recording. Record, okay. Okay, I ask you now.
Yeah, I just gave you permission.
Okay. So record. Yeah, I'm recording. Screen sharing. Okay, I think I'm recording. Yes. Okay, you guys, thank you for bearing with us.
The bottom of your screen that says hide changes highlighting.
Oh, great. Thank you. I was nervous about driving because the mirror thing is, I'm still discovering all the great. I was wondering why everything is pink highlighted. Sorry about that. Is there anything else you'd like me to zoom in on, William?
No, that's pretty much it. So like that's this image right there with like kind of that diagram. Those are just some of the housing. Well, that's a diagram of One Santa Fe and just some of the housing developments that you see popping up in these communities that kind of have like a rich history and so my project is going to explore like how can you kind of mirror that history and accomplish a housing situation at the same time.
So shall we look at all four and then have a discussion, or do you want to have a discussion after each one?
Doesn't matter to me.
Maybe we look at all four.
Okay. So who would like to go next?
I can go.
Okay. I just have to find you. Yeah, sorry. There's some space.
So you can just leave it on the whole thing and then I'll talk and zoom in. I'm going to try and describe this in a way I haven't before, just as a exercise. So what you're looking at is a kind of urban scale megastructure that's supposed to work as a kind of like self-sufficient arcology projects, right? There's a kind of energy neutral sort of system that is essentially a kind of new sort of residential model where you might come and live here to sort of escape the sort of unending exploitation of being part of a proletariat working class. And the idea is that this is a kind of like group home that's on the scale of like a country. And you would find here that pretty much every single part of it is kind of formally identical to every other part. So it produces this sort of neutral backdrop. And the only sort of like variation in the design is this checkerboard pattern where in all the sort of filled cells is like a kind of robust sort of spa-like interior that's extremely dense, but kind of the same everywhere you go. And then all the spaces in between are completely vacant, like unprogrammed courtyards that have absolutely sort of nothing in them. And this sort of kind of extends in the landscape for a while. And so at the top, you have some sort of this sort of like mock-up mass renderings, and then these drawings that zoom in the plan and section in the middle here, and then down at the bottom, these sort of perspectival kind of collage / drawings that are kind of trying to describe these weird kind of cellular but expansive spaces on the inside.
Leslie, did you say that this is on the scale of a country?
Yeah. Like a small country.
Liechtenstein?
That's it. What?
Like Liechtenstein size?
Maybe like Switzerland size. Maybe like Texas size. I don't know. Can you fit every person into
that would be a large country?
Can what?
Isn't it true that you can fit every person in the world in like a New York kind of like density within the state of Texas?
I haven't heard that.
I think it's true.
I believe that.
That would be terrifying.
I agree with that.
Anyway, we can move on. That's all.
Thank you. Who would like to go next? Luke or Theo?
I can go that way, and then Theo can share his screen after that, if that works.
Okay.
I have my 1 minute prepared, so mine might be a little brief, but my name is Luke. I've been working with Anna Niemark. My studies thus far have been centered around the concept of the void, as with a riderless horse, and the space left by human absence in the seat of the saddle. I'm interested in the interplay between the form and the formless, and the moment in which a rider is returned to their saddle in confounding ways, or possibly not returned at all. Our recent conversations have surrounded around representation of the American West in readings such as Ranner Bainham's Scenes in the American Deserta, and considering how to create void in an already sparse arena. We have been trying to understand how to construct a scale model that might be moved, documented, and resituated throughout differing landscapes of the North American West. For my miniature, I've been working on some crude models for like a pavilion size things and a small truck model, and I've been filming them in different scenes using a projected background with a projector. So that's where I'm at. What you're looking at here are there's an empty train station, which really kind of first sparked this at the beginning of the COVID breakout. The rainbow color is looking into different materials that cause the concept of void. So that's an ultra black paint pigment. And then the horse image is just some studies that I've been doing of removing horses from, or riders from their horses and the like. So.
Thank you. So I will unshare, and then maybe Theo can.
Thank you, Marceline. All right, can you see the video?
Yes.
All right. So my idea here is like I'm researching a new way of producing, exploring how to produce architecture. So my idea from the picture you see on the background is like I'm actually working on like urban landscape condensed photography. So the idea is like I put myself in movement to capture this whole environment and stretch and condense it into one frame. And afterward, I work in a VR virtual space using virtual reality glasses. And I'm trying to recreate and following those lines to create some kind of like a architecture base out of section cuts. Like I treat all those pictures as like architectural section of like a possible architecture. So the idea is like being still in movement and continuing my research of how my gesture produce produce an architecture. So the idea is to accumulate all those section cuts to get to like an architectural form. I don't define anything yet, but this is like still like on the research and mainly like the production. And so yeah, from there, I can after export I can export those models and assemble them in 3D. It's basically painting in a virtual space.
Thank you.
So Theo, you're creating these 3D images, and then is the idea that you would then kind of sandwich them and layer them, and that, you know, the interplay between the two kind of creates a
yeah, like
three-dimensional
from the urban
spaces and
landscape
cool.
to the VR space, and then I assemble all of them, because you can think always like an architecture from plants, right? Usually that's you start like building up, but then as like reverse it and then like slicing a whole possible architecture with all those different pictures. I mean, I could show you. I have like, I still have to. So I made like many different pictures. I see like here is like some of them by night, and I also have some like during the day. So there's like I'm trying to create like different ambience, that maybe some photo will define like some inside space, like the night pictures, and then some of them now you will not be able to see, right? No. But yeah, so some of them will be like the outside of the building. Like the day will be the outside, and the inside will be all those section. Yeah. I mean, night pictures.
Have you worked, or have you like kind of thought through the scale at which those, you know, is a full image that you've painted, is that, you know,
so that's really interesting.
So
basically there is no limit.
Is that the full architecture?
So there's no limit
right
in this virtual space, because as soon as I define my whatever, like 2.5 meters by 2 meters of physical space, but then virtual, but then all of a sudden the virtual space become infinite. So this tiny picture that you see here, I can stretch it like it's the size of a building. So I can always go back and forth. Exactly. But the idea is like I can be already in a section cut while I'm working. Like I can look up and like see like some part of the scene, but just like a volumetric two space almost.
Hi, Theo. So
Hi, Corinne.
I really like your project because I'm also functioning and working in VR. I don't know if you can see it. Let me turn off my virtual background.
You also have the HTC? Oh no, it's the
using the Oculus.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and I have a green screen behind me, and I've been like filming myself and all this like environments. So my project is very similar to yours, but then I'm creating like a world inside virtual space, and like just like how like Luke asked how you're tackling like scale. my project like almost is like scale-less because I'm designing spaces in like the live scale, like in the size of a room, a virtual environment, and then making them really small, scaling them down to make them look like tiny objects that people can own as digital assets. So I'm very interested in like knowing what was your idea, because I'm thinking of this in like a very three-dimensional space within the virtual world, and that's the whole point of like VR. So I want to know like what inspired you to like think in a very flat sort of constructed like sense within the VR.
So, okay, that's really interesting. So at the beginning, I was doing those pictures with my camera. So I was producing those images while being in a car in movement. So my idea was like, okay, so if if I want to produce some kind of architecture while in movement, I don't want to after process those images while sitting on my desk behind the computer. So the idea is like still like continuing like being myself, my whole body in movement to produce this architecture. And while producing, and then, so they are kind of still being 2D, but as soon as I add some volumes while painting, I'm using, so far I'm using teal brush. And so I'm kind of like painting over it and trying to find like some line that define spaces. So maybe at some point it's like maybe adding all the pictures and then all those 2D images become like a 3D volumes. I could like try to work all of them at the same time. So it was just like more like I was trying to find a technique that could allow me to still being in motion, because the name of my thesis might change, but it's called accelerated spaces. So I have to be in movement to produce. But basically I was actually like early research was on the futurism movements, and also like the study of the movements like from the chronophotography. So I was like this whole like, yeah, motions. But I'm excited to see what you also produce.
Yeah, I'll show it soon.
Leslie, can you explain your section? I'm assuming it's a section drawing with like the 3 cubes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sorry.
This is for Wesley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, let's see. Let
Leslie,
me
do you want to share it maybe?
Yeah, I can share.
Zoom in on what you want.
Here. So you're saying here? You're talking about this?
Those drawings there, yeah.
Oh, it's very slow. Yeah, so basically this is like, you can imagine this being just like a small swatch of what the entire project plan would be. So like these black cells here, and further in the corner, I would just keep going, but this is just like a kind of little bit of it. And you can see here in this section that basically you get these like co-equal distribution of interior and exterior spaces that have, very, very laggy, sorry, that have these openings on the bottom, which make actually the first floor, oh dear, the first floor of these like totally porous, but otherwise like not really fenestrated anywhere else on these sort of cubes. And then sort of this is a kind of diagrammatic or sort of didactic gesture to kind of demonstrate an idea of some sort of like resource and like waste distribution systems that are like servicing these volumes that pass underground and are kind of out of the way of the sort of interior regime, which is just this right now, you know, I mean, it's like pretty underdeveloped. This is like work I did for the magazine at the end of last semester, but they're just these sort of you know, relentless floor plates here with these kind of patterned breaks in the floors. So that's what you're seeing there. I'm gonna stop sharing because my computer's getting.
Fine. One thing I find kind of interesting about it is, I don't know, this might be biased towards my project a little bit because I'm just like, you know, it's like in the back of my head, but like the checkerboard has a lot of like connotation nowadays. I feel like not bad or good or anything,
Yeah.
but just like it makes you think of like transparency and makes you think of like texture, just like as a placeholder. So I find that like really interesting the way you represented it as like the middle square is kind of like that Photoshop like gray, like nothing's there kind of thing, and then you have like the black squares around it, just like that play on like the figure ground and how it kind of relates to like transparency in a way. And I find that really interesting. And like also in your section, I think it could be interesting like if the ground like started to show some of that like quality. I don't know, I just found it kind of interesting, like the way you were playing with the checkerboard. I mean, it's like such a, like a classic grid, but I think it has a lot of ways that you can manipulate it really interestingly, especially on the scale that you're working at, because
Yeah.
it's so large.
Yeah, it's interesting that you point that out, because that's something I definitely like haven't like put at the forefront of like talking about the project when I do, but is like from an idea earlier last semester about like how one would lay out urban space that didn't have any kind of like roads, had no sort of like nodal like geographic relationship. So there weren't like places of interest and then the routes between them, but instead like a kind of like a static urban landscape where there weren't, you know, there was like non-oriented in any kind of like you know, interesting cardinal way, right? So like, yeah, I suppose there's like a kind of rectilinearity, but the grid almost kind of becomes less important because it ends up being this kind of, you know, almost like an enfilade or something like that, where you end up just sort of confronting, you know, solids and voids in succession without there being much of a coordinate system.
Nice, thanks.
One question I was going to ask Will, I wanted to know like more specifically, I'm sure, you know, there's even more to like the project than you've been able to tell us in this 1 minute. Like, what does a residential development look like that is better than all those examples that you pointed out that are obviously bad?
Well, I don't know exactly what it looks like yet.
Sure, but like, what's the trajectory?
So part of my research has been focused on a co-living model, which is a relatively new model. And basically, like, I've been looking at apartments from like the post-war era, and you know, like the way our living has been designed is pretty much the same as it was post-war, although like even like now, especially in the last like 3 months, the way we live is totally different. So like a co-living model is kind of interesting. And so I don't know, I just kind of want to critique the notion that, you know, an apartment complex has to have this like just stagnant model where there's some retail on the bottom and a bunch of just densely packed units on top. And the only part of that model that can change is the retail configuration, basically just the interior walls.
Right.
And I just don't think that that's a very useful model for developing cities.
I have a question like on top of that too, because I was wondering, you mentioned like Austin being specifically the site.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you'd been thinking about like, I mean, we've had conversations about this, but like what is the role playing in the site? So many of the developments that you mentioned are like, so like not regarding site, right?
Yeah.
And I know Austin's like a super important part of the project.
Yeah.
How do you feel like you're addressing that? And also like, do you feel like, what is the criticism or what have you found about architecture? Because I feel like it can be pretty disappointing at times to see how a lot of these developments are so like independent of site. So
Yeah.
like, what have you found through that?
Well, so the site that I chose, like directly connected to the site that runs parallel to it, is a metro rail line that goes from East Austin to downtown. And there's no connection with that site, like with the existing building to that rail connection. And then there's also an underpass under the freeway that goes from the site to downtown. There's no connection with like that pedestrian walkway. So I'm actually reading through one of Tom Main's books, which is Combinatory Urbanism. And it's pretty dense, but it basically just talks about strategies of like how you integrate like urban tactics into a specific piece of architecture. And like, I don't think any of these developments that are going up now have a single one of those. And so like apart from like just designing some of these urban scale moves on a residential project, like I'm looking a lot at material qualities. Like Austin and the hill country of Texas in general are like very material rich in terms of like limestone and granite and forests, but none of that is reflected in the architecture. So for my miniature model, I'm going to try and do a rough massing of my proposal, but completely fabricate it by hand. So I've actually like started collecting a bunch of like, I don't know if you can see that, but like pieces of granite and shaping them. And like, so I want to build a model out of granite and limestone and steel. But so like another, like kind of a secondary goal for the project is to craft as much of this by hand. Because yeah, there's like no human craft in the housing development anymore.
Cool.
I have a question for Wesley. Hi, Wes.
Hey.
This is a really interesting, like these drawings are really interesting. And I was wondering if through creating like a uniform system of housing throughout the nation and like modularizing every dwelling unit, are you sort of taking a stand or suggesting a certain typology to housing, or are you trying to create a typology to housing that irrespective, that doesn't always, I mean, irrespective of like the social differences or the economic differences, even within a single city, and you're on purpose not taking that into consideration, or maybe you have, but this is your solution to that?
100%. Yeah, it is kind of trying to, in some ways, it's like an update to the Situationist Constance New Babylon project, but like taking into consideration, which is kind of like a post-labor sort of mega structure that is in alignment with a kind of like Marxist society that wherein you end up kind of not really having any private property anywhere, but then you also kind of take the sort of industrial functions and like transportation functions of the urban space and pull them kind of away, like below or above. And the idea was that it would all be automated and so forth. And most importantly, you don't have private interiors or exteriors for that matter. So people kind of, there are places to sleep, so to speak, but people aren't owning any particular one of them. And you kind of also, I think one way to think about it from like a typological standpoint is like in the floor plan of this project, none of the rooms would be rooms that you could like name with any of the kinds of names we use for rooms now. That's the hope, is that like I couldn't point to any part of this and say this is bedroom 1 and that's living room. one, you know, or so to speak, as a kind of yeah, so most definitely as a proposal to us as a kind of solution to what I think is like an actually untenable way in which we live in capitalist contemporary life.
So you're trying to take away the aspect of personalization in living?
Yeah.
I wonder how, like, at what fidelity you then need to design, you know, at what detail you need to get down to in order to design, like if you're not going to call if you're not going to give anything in terms of room or anything like that, you almost have to design away any ability to see it as such. If that,
yeah, I think I'm gonna kind of.
How you're doing it.
Oh, sorry, what? You cut out for a second.
I'm just wondering how you're thinking of doing that.
I am right now, and none of this is shown here because it's still in development, but I'm right now kind of working from the bottom up, trying to work with photographs of people's bodies and make collages that would feed into a kind of way to build out like a kind of narrative arc out of like still images or maybe like lightly animated images that would allow me to like tell certain stories that take place in this world that then the sort of architecture could like kind of could kind of like come out of that or be generated by the process of like assembling images of people and developing narratives around their association with each other.
Luke, I'm curious about the Banham reference that you mentioned, because it's one that I think not many of us have actually read. It came, I think, if I'm not mistaken, near the end of his life. The reflections on the desert, the West, the emptiness. Maybe can you tell us a little more about what your takeaway from that was?
Yeah, it started with, I mean, I've been confronted with the fact that I have to drive back to Colorado at some point this summer, and so part of it, I think, instead of, you know, being concerned with that, I kind of realized I could use it to my advantage. And early on in that writing, he notes that let me find my notes on it. That the desert, you know, if you go down to the root of desert, it's really emptiness and an absence, and that plays into void in a really interesting way. And his understanding and his kind of obsession with what became, you know, the Mojave was really based in the fact that it was this human construct, and the desert and everything we understand about the desert is really of our own kind of creation. So if you look at it, it is actually teeming with life. There is, you know, it's not absent, it's not deserted. There are things happening there. We've just kind of understood it as this barren landscape because of how we can't occupy it or how we have occupied it before. So I don't know if that quite gets there, but
yeah, I think it actually, I mean, it makes me want to read that now again, because I mean, I've known about the text, but I've never actually had the time to dive into it. And I think as all of these new data centers are getting built in Nevada, and I mean, that as a site becomes, I would be curious to revisit Banham and then think about how that discussion can be updated. Because it's sort of like the architecture for ecologies where he's looking at Los Angeles. I always think it's fun to kind of imagine if we would rewrite that today, would we still have 4? Would we have 6? Would we have 10? Would there be 2? What would they be? Yeah, his writing is sort of prescient about how some of these sites have evolved over time.
Mhm.
And so your own work will be, what is your program again? You said, because you showed the train station, are you designing, what is it?
Initially it started as a train station, but I think we've kind of, I'd love to actually build a scale model of something, and then, you know, we've talked about actually building something that I would tow behind my car and then kind of deploy it in all these different places. And the project would actually be documenting it and understanding, you know, how it interplays with the different landscapes. So at this point, I'm kind of really just looking at it as somewhat of a pavilion. And I certainly need to, I think, dig a little deeper there. Because initially my thought was I was planning on doing the train station at LAX, the new metro stop. But I think given everything that has happened, that is a train station is an interesting and a new problem for a post-COVID world. So.
Can you talk more about the cutting the riders off the horses? Are you going to keep doing that?
Yeah, I think so. I think
Cool.
you know, yeah.
Yeah, they're really just, it's just such a quick little move, but it's really cool.
Yeah,
Really
and understanding, you know, that void, actually, the term void somewhat originated in that sense, in the void of the saddle itself. So,
wow.
And how that plays into the American West too, I think is certainly an interesting, and how that connection happens, I certainly haven't gotten to yet, but.
I had another question about that, Luke, actually.
Yeah.
Because when I notice specifically the image on the left where the riders cut out, it gives me like, I don't know if you've thought, or I mean, I'm sure you have, about the theme of like control. Like when you see the horse without its rider, the thing that is taming it or like controlling it, it's kind of like, it kind of makes you think like, I guess, unsettling. And for me, this is like, I see kind of an emotion of like sadness of the horse being almost tamed in this setup. And I was wondering like how that related to the project somehow, like the idea of control and like releasing of control, humans needing to kind of dominate, or I don't know.
Yeah.
That's something I thought of when I saw that image.
Well, I think that's a super interesting take, and I think it does sort of play into what Bannon was talking about, in the sense that, you know, life goes on without us, and life exists without us, and until, you know, and especially in the American West, it was the you know, one of the last frontiers in a sense, and how we occupied it as a, you know, as a colonization strategy was dark and twisted and you know, and represented in a number of troublesome ways. And I think the horse is somewhat parallel to that in a way as well. So.
Yeah.
What's funny is my whole thesis deals with masking. So it's interesting to see this image and you guys talking about it, because I have a totally different understanding of it. I'm not going to go into it because it's not about my project right now. But yeah, it's just interesting how it's like more symbolic, and I read it more literally than what you guys are like talking about. So it's just kind of interesting, like the interpretation of the image that you guys are talking about. I know I've never seen any stuff from like there's a lot of studios I haven't seen stuff at, so it's like really interesting for me to like branch out and see more stuff, because just like that reading of the image, like that kind of resonates with me, and it's in the back of my head. But I can talk about more about that when it's my time to share.
Luke, I also think it's really, your project brings a sort of awareness to the meaning of transportation, because most of us, when we travel, it's all about how we are going to get from point A to point B through whatever medium. But I think that you, in a way, by cutting out the human, you're sort of like disassociating the human experience of transport, and we're actually having to look at, say, like riding a horse, or being navigating yourself through a train station, or just finding your way through a desert or in a wide space. It's suddenly doesn't become about our experience, and it's about what actually is.
I gotta write that down. Hold on. Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting that and exciting that we kind of got to this point, because, I think personally I did, Jonathan, like start more interested in form and material studies and things like that. And as we become more removed and less able to kind of facilitate designs and see them in front of us, it's kind of had to turn a little more theoretical and a little more insightful. So what I am excited is to get back into building things, and like I mocked up a little model the other day, and that made me super happy. So I would encourage all of you to kind of start doing that as well, and because it did really change how I was thinking about all this. So.
Hey, Luke, when you say you mocked up a model, what did you make your model out of?
It's all polystyrene and string.
Cool, looks sick.
And I've been using that as, and I'm working on a little mock-up of like a car, and I've been using projector kind of play and see throughout what I expect my drive to be. So.
One thing that I find funny is that just like this is kind of a general comment, it's not really specific to anybody, but like the whole COVID-19 pandemic and us being at home, there was that whole turn at the end of the semester that we had to go all digital, blah, 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 all of this kind of stuff, and kind of rethink how we interact with the computer and things like that. But I think it's so funny that now, like in thesis, I feel like a lot of us are trying to not do that. We're trying to bring back that physicality when it's not necessarily possible. So it's like, what are the opportunities that brings? Like trying to challenge like what we can make and how it's not without any resources. So I don't know, I just find that really interesting. And like, I think it's important to take an attitude towards that, either one way or the other. Like, are we either going to really try to push the physical and stray away from that digital sense, or are we going to really lean into the digital and just keep it all in that kind of space? Or if there's somewhere in between that we can kind of mediate. So I think that's just like something that like I guess everybody should think about. But yeah, just find that kind of interesting. Because like my studio with Florencia, it was all about trying to fake. Like I ended up calling our project Imposter, because it was totally fake, but it was all about making it as real as possible in the sense of a model and not necessarily an architecture. So I find that really interesting.
Is anybody else working with some materials? I mean, William, you were talking about granite.
Yeah.
Right? That's going to be amazing. How do you like cut it? And
so I actually bought some stone cutting tools. So cutting it is really easy, but then So I'm thinking about using granite and limestone because those are the natural stone deposits here, and then developing you know, a mini steel structure that supports it all and connects it all. So actually the hard part is drilling holes in it without cracking it or shattering it, but it's just a fun process, and it's a kind of a fun way to make models again and not just send it to a 3D printer and hope that it prints correctly. Like,
is there something amazing about that? Like the idea that the model, normally the model represents, and it's an abstraction and it's sort of, you know, we use foam core or museum board or something that's at a thinner dimension than the actual material would be at 1:1. But then there's something odd that happens when you literally take like a block of granite and start to model it. It's almost like the material is out of scale with the technique. I would be fascinated to see like making just a small video of it, or it sounds like you're kind of constructing a job site in your, like the desk becomes a construction site in an odd way.
No, I plan on making some videos of the process and kind of doing like a time lapse of it. And I don't know what's going to come out of it. It could be a total disaster, like trying to build an entire model out of like really hard materials to use, but I'm hopeful.
Also, Tio, I have so many references for you. I'll send them to you.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, I have a ton.
What are the?
Do what you're talking about.
Can you mention?
Yeah, I don't know specific people, but I can show. I mean, what you're kind of doing is some Laura Owens, but I mean, this is painting, but you're doing it three-dimensionally, which is like, is kind of interesting. Like you can, here, let me see if I can find a good example. Also, like there's like this whole new like way people work. I don't really know what to call it right now, but that they use VR and then they totally materialize it with real things, and it becomes like this very strange, like formal material relationship. Let me see. It'll take me too long to find, but I'll share with everybody, and so you can take a look at it.
Well, I'm curious if the use of granite and limestone are suggestive, because they are such strong and such prominent materials. I'm curious if they're suggestive of some sort of like an internal strategy or a programmatic or strategy that's of housing that you're trying to approach it with.
They haven't been yet, really, but there's like different qualities of the different stones that could very well inform those kinds of things. So like limestone is very porous and has a lot of like internal cavities from where shells and other materials have been fossilized and then disintegrated. And then like granite is very aggregate, so you can like really pick out the different minerals in it that have aggregated at different sizes. So that's something that's kind of crossed my mind, but I haven't really incorporated that into the project yet.
I think it's great that you've chosen materials that are quite different from each other and so it does bring in like a lot of opportunity to sort of imply its characteristics to the characteristics of your own housing project, of like its porous or the density and things like that.
Yeah. Thanks.
I'm sharing some in the chat.
Oh, you shared.
And actually, this is really interesting. Do you have like any, I mean, I don't know who created that. Like you said, it's like this artist you were just speaking about, or she's just like only like a 2D? I mean,
Is it
what's,
Laura Owens?
yeah.
This isn't Laura Owens, but I put his Instagram on there. But it's this whole like new style that people do. It's like they sculpt everything in virtual reality, or they'll like sculpt an object that already exists, and it gets like very like lumpy and like painterly like, and then they apply some kind of abstracted material to it that makes it what it, you can tell what it is, but also not really at the same time. I
It's
don't
like
know.
it's
It's
like
like
being
I don't really
going
know how
back
to
and
explain
forth
it.
between. Sorry.
Go ahead. You're fine.
No, it's so then like the process is like going back and forth into reality and virtual reality.
Yeah.
So they 3D print it and then like they paint
It's
over
not.
it.
It's
Oh,
not
it's not.
real.
Oh, it's only
It's
3D.
rendered.
Okay, it's only rendered.
Even, I mean, that's what I was saying. Like there's like a whole thing with the models now. Like people will render something in a gallery and it doesn't actually exist. It's not there. But it's so. This is like what I'm talking about a lot in my thesis too. Is like you're kind of making something so real, and you're masking it into an environment that could exist, that you kind of are in this space of whether it's real or not. Like you're not really sure. It's kind of like that duality of physical and digital. So the phygital, if you want to call it that. I mean, I have some problems with that word, but because it's not phygital if you don't make anything real, you know. So yeah. Anyway, I'm not sure what to call it. I'm not doing a good job of describing it. I got to figure it out still.
But thanks for sharing. This is really cool.
Yeah, I have many more I can send to you privately.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
This does feel a bit like sitting in studio, actually. Today, I enjoy, I think the smaller groups work well because we can all see each other on one screen. And sorry, Eric, because you came in a bit after we looked at the Miro boards together. But everybody's work is on the Miro board in the section where Florencia Faris made an area with all 4 projects, and then the other group.
Yeah, it's funny advising on the seats on the history theory side that half the time I know exactly what the design work is going to look like, and half the time when I see it, I'm like, "This is the project we've been talking about." It's like, what? So yeah, it's always a surprise to find out whether it's what you expect. But yeah, so I've only seen bits of them because I'm so far I mostly see the design work during prep a little bit, but more like if people are frustrated and trying to explain verbally, then they break down and show me the design work for like 2 seconds. That's kind of how I see it. So yeah, it's a funny thing to be on this side of the fence. But I guess actually right now I'm supposed to be switching over to Florencia's group to go through their projects one by one. So I probably will leave you guys now and try to find them. Although I'm not sure where they are. But well,
they're in the other breakout room.
They're just in the other breakout room?
Yeah, I can move you there.
You can be teleported.
Bye.
Yeah, Faris, are we all meeting again together?
Yeah, Francia said around 3:10, but she hasn't updated me yet.
Okay.
Maybe we can jump over and just see, catch some of theirs.
Yeah, how do we leave Faris?
Individually move everyone to that. unless I could close all rooms and then everyone would join together. But I don't know if they're done yet.
You should just collapse us into their room. They won't notice.
I can collapse everyone. Hold on, let me see what Florencia says.
In the meantime, anybody else have any thoughts?
Wait, Wesley, I was going to ask you, what are you thinking to do for your miniature? Did you say that?
Oh, there's two ideas. I don't know. I think it could be, the most recent idea is that it'll be like a pretty architectural one. It'll just be like a model of the interior of one of these sort of volumes. However, there's also, we'll kind of see how, I'm kind of working on two different modes at once, like two different scales at once. So it may be something a lot more diorama-like a kind of scene or a bunch of scenes.
Mm-hmm. That sounds good. So you're focusing more on interior in your miniature, most likely?
The project is kind of about interiors, but I wouldn't say I'm focusing on it as an architectural thing.
Francis said 5 more minutes.
But she doesn't want us to be there yet?
I mean, I could switch everyone. I would just have to select everyone's name like individually to move you guys.
And
We
Theo,
can wait.
Theo, I was going to ask how you're approaching miniatures.
I think it's still early for me to see how I'm going to create it because I'm still trying to figure it out how I'm going to actually produce this architecture. And so I was trying to maybe make some kind of like how to say that, like a sensation of me being in the creation, because everything is about movement. So because I'm abroad, so for me, like to send something over might be complicated. So it will be like about 3D printing, probably directly in SCI-Arc. And so I could create like some kind of like a work area that's like kind of like probably like show the effect of movement. That's where like probably like an idea of that we can see that there's like some kind of a production and gesture like around like lines. So it will be like some kind of like putting my workspace area into motion. Probably like will be like something that let me express this whole idea. But I'm not sure yet, so let's see how it's going to be.
It's kind of amazing the way the idea of workspace changes. I mean, it's odd. This almost reminds me of when I was a student at the Architectural Association. In those days, they just had a few studios. And so you had to like put your name in a lottery or run and grab the studio space. But most of us had to work at home, at least for the first few years. And it was like this, you would work at your home and then you would bring things into the school. So you would see people like showing up, walking down the street with models and drawing. I mean, in those days it was in a portfolio, like your drawings were in this big thing. So it is, yeah, it's just like an odd, it's weird that now it's even more radical. Like you're sitting in France and sending a 3D print to Los Angeles, and then the print can be shown there and shipped to you, and then you can do something with it. So the idea of just like where the production occurs and where the space of creation and production is so radically distributed. It's pretty fascinating.
And also, yeah, definitely, I think it's incredible also like all those new techniques and like worldwide transfer that allows us to still continue to produce. And also what I realized is like with this virtual reality, so I define a physical space that's like I was saying, like 2 meters by 1.5. I could go a little bit bigger, but I don't have that much space. But as soon as I put the lens, I forget that I'm actually in that room and I have like this gigantic canvas, white canvas with my image that I saw before, like on like this 17-inch screen, becoming those gigantic painting on like a whole building. It's really interesting how to go in between, and then from there I just condense it to like a very small object that I can just send at the other end of the world to 3D print. It's quite amazing.
Did everyone see Faris just put in a link for about 3D printing?
Yeah, so for miniatures, only students who are out of town will be able to use the shop 3D printing services. So we're just trying to get a count of everyone to let Rodney know. Yeah. Also, Florence just said they're ready, so I'm gonna collapse the rooms now.
Thanks, Faris.
We're back. So this was a special experience of this moving from room to room. Thank you guys, thanks everybody for joining this. You please send me comments if you think this work. We keep on doing breakout rooms. If not, we might find some other solution. We do, you know, I'm getting more accounts for Zoom for thesis, so we might do different Zooms. Otherwise, I thought that this was, I don't know if any of you were going in and out of different rooms. Otherwise, I listen all room in our side. What is it? Faris, what he's saying, I'm not sure. We're just getting a count now, then Ronnie, yeah. Oh, I think that was an answer from another chat, but we can follow that.
I sent
Yes.
the form for 3D printing in the shop.
Yes. So since I have you all here, Faris sent out that form. That form, as you know, we're going to give priority to students that are not in town, anywhere that is like far from LA, that you cannot bring a model, so you don't have to be FedExing it and stuff like that. So please fill out the form. It's a private form. It's not shared with the rest. It's just for us to know and to work with the shop to know how we can do it. Remember that what we're planning is that for midterm review, we have availability to more things, also as more things open. So please follow up with Faris and Kyle on that. Any general comments? Yes, Marceline, the Zoom in the other side, did it work out?
It was great. I think, I actually think the smaller groups work really well, because we first did the screen share and then we just got all together in the grid where we could all see each other. And then occasionally if somebody wanted to refer to something, we'd pull back into the Miro. But I think it was really, really great. And everybody was talking and it was fun.
Excellent. I think that even we could break into 3 breakout rooms. So I think that please send me your comments for those of you that were presenting. You know, remember Christina, we were talking the last time. You know, thank you for requesting that we break into 2 groups. It might be that we might break into 3 groups. So let's see. You know, just let me know. Okay, everybody. See you again at 5. And thank you for all your comments. They're very helpful for everybody, for students and for faculty. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.